Hello, my name is Cynthia and welcome to my FlossTube channel. Today's video is a little bit different. I was sent a beautiful lamp by the BenQ company to review on my channel, give my honest opinion. It's not sponsored, but I was gifted the lamp in exchange for my opinion shared on my channel. So if you'll just give a couple of minutes to listen about the attributes of the lamp, I will link it below. I, spoiler, really like it. I'll show it in comparison to my aught lamp that was giving me trouble in that it was easily falling over. The bulb would come out, I'd have to pop it back in, and it just won't stay straight any longer. It does work well, but it's much clunkier than the new lamp that was sent. So I will segue to that, and then stay tuned for a Stitch With Me, Know Your Needleworker Tag. I wanted to show a demonstration of how I stitch. If you're curious, I stitch in hand, and I was able to get a really extreme close-up of my stitching, and I thought it was maybe somewhat helpful to some that are interested in the sewing method or just like to see a different way of stitching. And I forgot to mention in the video that I recorded yesterday as I stitched, I'm using the Stitchy Pop ballpoint needle. I prefer it to the Sullivans just because my Sullivans have come bent twice and the Stitchy Pop never has. It's a little bit hard to find right now, as are all needles, but it is a wonderful tool to pop through the hole of the linen, and you'll see that as I'm stitching. So thanks again for tuning in, and I'll put timestamps at the bottom to show particular stitching techniques if you want to skip ahead. Thanks again. I'm here to talk about the BenQ e-reader light that I was sent for my honest review. I wanted to show how it works in comparison to my aught light that is beside me here. Let me show you that one first. Very loud and clunky. It also is hard to keep straight, and it falls over a lot of the time. It does have good light, but it's, as you can hear, very loud and jarring when you adjust it. There's the light you get from the aught light. Here is the light you get from this new BenQ e-reader lamp. It's very smooth. It cantilevers over the edge. Listen to the adjusting, not a sound. And it has a very wide reach. Di's gonna help us. It has 150% more space than a traditional desk lamp. So I can adjust it down and up, and it goes much wider. It also is a touch on and off, and it adjusts to the light around it, and it has a warm setting and a light setting. I like to use the warm setting for reading and the cool setting for stitching. It shows the color more true than a lot of bright lamps based on the technology of it, and it has a really heavy duty cord that I appreciate so it won't get broken. It's, like I said, very easy to adjust, which is the main feature I like. It's a little space age looking. My husband actually really likes it. I'd like to try the floor lamp model of this and maybe give this to my husband. But that is the BenQ Light. I really, really like it, especially for the ease of adjusting and the color, the light, and then on and off. Thanks. I wanted to demonstrate some of how I stitch in hand using the sewing method from the top of the fabric. I do a lot of things like a left-handed person might, I've been told, so the stitches I do may be opposite of yours, but hopefully you can see the technique I'm using and find some inspiration to maybe try something new if you don't do the sewing method. I always have the fabric turned so that my stitches are going up. I find they look the best. I do some sideways stitches, you'll see that in a little bit, but I learned from Teresa Vanette initially that her stitches lay better when she was stitching upward, and I agree. For me, that's the case as well. So I manipulate the fabric and always try to make sure that I'm starting on the right spot or in the leg going the right direction. So anyway, I wanted to, like I said, demonstrate that and also introduce myself a little bit more to some of my newer subscribers. I've been on YouTube for 2 years, but I've never done the Know Your Needleworker Tag, nor have I answered some of these questions. Most of them I've probably peppered in and out of my videos. The first one being, where do you live? I usually introduce my video saying the weather here in Fort Worth, Texas, which is where I've been overall about 15 years. We had a little bit of a stint in Oklahoma to go do Jim's first pastorate, but we've been here in Texas for, like I said, about 15 years. I was born in Wichita, Kansas, left there after high school to go to Oklahoma Baptist University, where I met my husband, and then we've worked in and out of Oklahoma and Texas ever since. So the second question segues into that. What do I do for a living? Right now, I am a stay-at-home mom. In the past, before the pandemic especially, I worked with preschool children. I was an administrator for a Mom Stay Out program at our church, and I've worked in schools off and on. My education was to be a social worker, which is what I did for the first 10 years of my career. Kind of burned out a little, to be honest, but I worked with mentally ill adults in case management, and then as more of an administrative role. And I also worked with children's health insurance through the state of Texas. That was my favorite job. I went from school to school speaking and trying to encourage a lot of immigrant children to be covered by the state health insurance plan. And it was well appreciated, so that was a change from the response I got from my former clients. I worked with a lot of really, really nice immigrant families, and so I really enjoyed that job. I intended to go into counseling. My degree was family psychology, but I never did do my graduate work. My husband went all the way with his PhD, and I didn't think we could handle 2 students at the same time, nor was I really that invested in going forward with counseling. So it's definitely benefited my life as a mom and as a minister's wife to have the psychology degree, though, so I don't count that time as wasted. And of course, education has value just in its own self. The other question is, do you have children? I've talked about my kids quite a bit in my videos. They're such a big part of my life, it's hard not to. I have 4 children. The first 2 we added to our home through adoption when we were in our mid-20s, knowing that we probably would never have children, as we were told. And so we had 2 beautiful girls adopted from infancy, in a really long story that I won't go into here, but it was a miracle. And then at age 35, I was actually able to get pregnant out of the blue with my son, never expecting, like I said, to have children of my own. So felt that was such a miracle. And then 19 months later, had another child. Also, just a miracle. So our family that was supposed to be no children ended up being 4 children. God just really worked that out. They're a great testimony for our family. As far as pets go, I have a dog that often bellows in the background. She's actually outside right now. She's discovered that we have some rabbits in our yard this fall, so she is on constant watch for those. She's a coonhound, treeing coonhound, and she loves to hunt. Unfortunately, she usually wants to hunt our cats. We have 2 cats that live in our bedroom now after having Talia. We were told she was a Labrador, and she, like I said, is not. So her prey instinct is too high to spend much time with the cats, but they have the house to themselves at night, and she has it during the day, and it's worked out so far. So 2 cats and a recently acquired goldfish, actually betta fish, that my youngest daughter has complete responsibility for, and she's doing very well with that. I didn't mention I have 3 daughters and 1 son. My oldest daughter is 20, next 16, and then we have our bookends at age 9 and 8. They're 19 months apart, as I said. So they're almost like twins, and they are best friends. They get along so well. I'm very grateful for that. My other hobbies is the next question, and I have quite a few. I have always been a crafter from the time I was a small girl. There I am going in the wrong hole. You can see how I can back out easily. My other hobbies included in the past scrapbooking, as many of you also have done, and then kind of morphing into paper crafting with decorating my planners and doing journals and different gifts for family. I like to do photo kind of collage pieces. Sometimes I would use beeswax on top. That's called encaustic. I've showed that one time before. I haven't done that in a lot of years though. I never thought I could do needlework. I tried to crochet with very small success, never really getting the hang of that. I had tried sewing as far as making clothes and things when I was in high school, and I was not very good at that either. I did learn enough on a sewing machine from my home ec teacher. My mom didn't sew. I learned enough from Miss Townsend to be able to make pillows and curtains. I love to decorate. That's probably another hobby as far as planning out a room and making sure the colors work, and that is a passion that I got from my mom. Her home was absolutely beautiful, still is, but it's one thing that we shared together. So those are my main hobbies, and as well as reading. I have gotten back into that with gusto recently. I've not had a lot of luck with audiobooks. I need to do that so I can kind of combine my favorite things, which are stitching and reading. But for the most part, I'm real picky about the reader, so I hesitate to invest in an audiobook. I need to get some from the library and see how I like that. There's a bunch of favorites questions that come next. Let me see what I'm going to do here with my stitching. I do show that I'm not a perfect stitcher. I have some friends that I Zoom with that enter things in the fair and get blue ribbons and are gorgeous stitchers. I'm somewhat of a beginner to intermediate, and so my stitches aren't perfect, and I don't have the perfect technique. I did teach some women how to stitch this summer. I had a group of about 40 women, and the older ones, when they heard some of the things I did, literally gasped aloud. They said, so I know I don't do everything by the book, but it is simple for me, and I enjoy what I'm doing, so I try not to stress out too much about my back looking perfect, or if I skip a few stitches, which you might see here, I don't, stress out too much about it. So let me hang on onto the favorites section, and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. I wanted to check that everything I was speaking into the microphone I have was actually recording. I can't hear myself or see that I'm actually picking up and how the sound is, so wanted to make sure that was something you could hear and make a few corrections. I noticed I started the video saying welcome to my stitch along. This is kind of a stitch along. I guess it's a stitch with me is what I meant to say. And I also said some of the older ladies that were at my event where we learned cross stitch. I met some of my ladies that were actually stitchers that had been stitching for a long time. And what they gasped about, I guess I should tell you, was I use knots on the back of my stitching. A lot of times I'll anchor the end, and I don't use a knot there necessarily, but I use such a tiny knot that it doesn't really matter from the front. I think Tina from For the Love Stitches on Instagram, she used to have a YouTube, but she doesn't anymore, had shown that she does knots, and I was like, thank you. I've been doing that all along and feeling sort of guilty, but as long as it's not a giant clump of thread, it's really not a big deal, and it helps me to make sure that my stitch was anchored. So I use a little knot. Dirty little secret, there it is. Let me go into the last part of the Know Your Needleworker tag. That is for your favorites. The first one being my favorite movie. You have seen, if you've seen my very first videos, I was working on a Wizard of Oz piece because that probably would be my favorite movie. I know it's old. I think it was in the 30s that they filmed Wizard of Oz, but I read the books as well, and coming from Kansas, I always felt a special connection with that story. I love Judy Garland. I love her voice. I love the color in that movie when they go from black and white to color. That always was mesmerizing to me as a child, and it's just kind of a memory to me too. So about once or so every year or two, I pull out my DVD copy and make my kids watch it with me. I have a lot of it memorized. And so Somewhere Over the Rainbow is one of my favorite songs, at least sung by Judy Garland. Then favorite TV show. I don't really have a favorite TV show. I find a lot of the things on TV these days are just not something I want to spend my time watching. So we watch a lot of old shows. Like right now we're rewatching Castle from, I think we have a Hulu subscription so my husband can watch basketball, but we watch Castle every night together. We kind of just pick a show. Sometimes it's Blue Bloods. We love that one as well. We went through Bones, which isn't quite as clean, but I do love Blue Bloods and Castle for the most part. As far as books, it's really hard to name a favorite book. I tend to glom onto an author. If I like their book, I read everything they've ever written. That's kind of how I operate. I do that with designers too. I want to design from the same. There's me getting a piece of thread out, by the way, just to show how I pull that out from the front. I always use floss cards if I can. And I'm also showing variegated thread here as I do my stitching. I'm sure you've noticed already, but I complete each stitch. I never have done the one leg and back method. I don't remember if that's called Dutch or what that's called, but it confuses me to do one leg at a time. I always have completed each stitch, so that's just how I do it, and it works better for the variegation. So I have a little bit of a harder time seeing on this portion of the video for some reason, so I kind of have slowed down from what I was doing with my white dinky dye silk. I think the silk also just stitches faster, if you can tell. I was really going quickly with that silk, and this is a little bit slower. But anyway, the favorite book I would have to say, and I've shared on my channel before, would be Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers. I love that story as far as the redemptive. I mean, it's called Redeeming. I love a story that starts with someone who's maybe kind of a mess, and as the book continues, shows their growth and the way that God can redeem a person from every bit, even her name. It was just a beautiful picture, allegory of the story from the Bible, and I've heard it's being made into a movie. I'm not sure I want to watch the movie, though. It's such a difficult topic to talk about, sex trafficking and child exploitation. I don't know how they would do that in a movie, but I probably will watch it. Just, I know it can't be as good as the book. I love most of Francine Rivers' books. I do think, though, that her historical ones are a little bit better than her contemporary books. The other question, I have a couple more is all. What is your favorite music? I wish I could be a musician. I play piano rather mediocrely. I did accompany choirs because I was the only one that would do it when I was in high school, but I wasn't awesome at it by any means. Took a little bit of classes in college and realized I am not at this level. But I do love rhythmic, kind of unplugged music. I have said before, my favorite band, in fact, I'm stitching the lyrics from their song Today is the Savior's Day. I'll link that below if you want to check them out, is the band Rend Collective from Ireland. They have a wonderful concert they put on. I was able to see them about 4 years ago and just felt my senses reeling from their talents and their instruments. They had lots of instruments I'd never seen before, kind of whirly-giggy things that were, really rhythmic and loud, and they would actually rotate I know one of the wives of the band members is also a band member, and she can play drums and piano and guitar, and they're just so happy. I like uplifting music, but I also like Norah Jones and sort of the more quiet and peaceful music. I try to incorporate that into my channel, my love of music. I don't know if you've noticed, I've had several comments about what is the intro music I use, and it's actually just from the YouTube library, so that I don't have to accidentally not credit the source for my music and get in trouble. I did that once. But I love the peaceful quality that music can add and the kind of ambient background noise. I love to have classical music playing when I'm at home. It just is very soothing to me. It's a big part of that, but also I like to feel upbeat, like with Rend Collective. So those are some things about me, some favorites. There's one last question that I sort of struggled to answer, not really sure. They ask if there is one word that describes you, and I have always had my email, you'll notice below, as sincerelycynthia, mainly because of the alliteration. It's not the same letter, but it's the same sound. I love that aspect of my email name that I've had for so long, but also just a character trait that I strive for is to be sincere and honest to the best of my ability. I know we're not perfect, but I do hope to show love for my God and for people around me, for my family. And I hope sincere is a word that would be used to describe me. So that's mainly what I wanted to show. There's a little more footage on the clips I filmed that shows the green aspect of my sampler. And I'm not even sure I've said what this is that I'm stitching. I'll try to insert that at the beginning. If I don't, then let me say it now. It's Stacy Nash Christmas at Hollyberry Farm. And it has a primitive feel. The one strand of floss, I believe, works pretty well to cover on this 36 count fabric. But some of the leaves, you'll notice, do have a thinner coverage. I almost want to do them in 2 strands, but knowing that this is a primitive sort of design, I went with 1, and I used 2 different colors of DMC. So let me speed ahead just a little bit, and I will show you how I stitched the holly leaves on this piece. Or I'm not sure if they're holly leaves exactly, but the green foliage that is on this stitch, I have sort of popcorn jumped around with a dark green and a little bit lighter green, 934 and 935. And I will show you that in just a second. Here I'm trying to show the variegation that happens with the 2 different flosses I use. It's subtle, but I do feel like it makes a little bit of a difference. I just kind of hop around with the dark and the light, and I wanted to show you that. Here's the 2 flosses in natural light. I turned my overhead light off because it was hard to see. And I did have to frog before I started, so I'm glad y'all gave me reason to really look at what I was doing, or my whole border would have been off on the top. I had a lot more footage of me stitching the green, but I struggled a little bit, to be honest, when I was doing the counting. This is very, not difficult counting, but intricate, and I usually had been highlighting as I go, so it was hard for me to hold the camera with my leg and stitch and count and think about what you could see. So it's a little bit like trying to walk and chew gum. Sometimes I can't do that, but anyway, I hope you can tell I had put in this dark color first. The stitches that you see ahead of me there are of the darker color, 935, or is it 934? I always get it confused. Either the dark or the light, 934, 935. And I'm doing the lighter now. I sort of did the dark toward the bottom. If you imagine light coming from the top of the sampler, not 100%, but most of it, I put the dark color to the bottom and the light color to the top so that it looks more like a highlight than a shadow. But I did put a few of the lighter stitches to the lower section and a few of the darker ones to the light so that it does sort of mimic a hand-dyed floss. I could have gone a higher contrast and used like 936 and 934. I've done that before. In my Hawkrun village, I ended up changing the contrast so that the colors in a checkerboard showed up, but in this primitive piece, I didn't really want it to be that high of a contrast. I just wanted it to be subtle. And if you did one strand, it would probably be simpler. This was just something I was doing to kind of experiment and see how it turned out. And I do like it, so I'm going to continue. But like I said, if you want to play with the colors, they usually have a range, not always sequentially. DMC isn't always like the colors I'm using, 934, 935, 936. Sometimes you can look at the name and see like light beaver gray. I'm not sure that this is the case on that color, but for example, light gray, medium gray, dark gray. Sometimes they're like the 400s, the 600s, the 800s. So you have to know the name of the floss. This is called dark avocado, light avocado, medium avocado. So that just happens to be one of my favorite Christmas colors. I like a piney green. And if I'm using Blackbird designs, I always stick with 3011, 3012, 3013 and do the same kind of method. In fact, they sub those DMCs out for their, I think, Oscar, and they stitch with those, or their designs. Barb and Alma's designs often use 3011, 3012, 3013. So if you're wanting more of a Blackbird kind of faded green, you can get that same kind of over dye. And there is my alarm for me to go pick up my kids from school. So I hope you enjoyed the demonstration of my stitching and that you learned something new about me just as a friend and kind of where I'm coming from with my history and career and family life. If you have any questions about the stitching I do or about any of the things I shared about myself, then feel free to either email me or ask below. And like I said, this portion I sort of shortened because even right here I see that I'm making a mistake. I'm gonna have to pull out a stitch. So this wasn't something that I could stitch with me quite as easily. I needed to do more of the fill-in stitching, which was a little more mindless. This was too much counting. But anyway, hope you enjoyed it. Hope you were well. And as I end all my videos in the book of Psalm, chapter 90, verse 17, it says, "May the favor of the Lord our God be upon us and establish the work of our hands." Have a great week.